It's very nice to see you. It was kind of amazing because I'm talking to my friend Rick from Bat Gap,
Yeah.
and I'm telling about when I'm doing an AI, and he goes, "Hey, Nipun, he set me up with Bat Gap bot and stuff." And I'm like, "Hey, great, I'd love to talk to him." And now I come to talk to you. You are like so huge in this AI. Compassion bot is like a tiny little corner in your world. So awesome, buddy.
Yeah.
Awesome what you
Yeah. Yeah. I love your energy and enthusiasm, everything I've read about you online. And
You are a true
uh
yogi. You are a yogi. I honor and honor and honor the yogi in you. And I'm a yoga. I'm a yogi. I live a couple miles from pranayama's. I mean, pranayama, Yogananda's ashram in
hmm.
Encinitas. I'm sure was that one of the books that when you were a kid and you said you thought I'd be a Himalayan yogi. It must have
Yeah.
been autobiography of a yogi, right? You're reading.
I mean, it wasn't, but I'm familiar. I'm very familiar with that place. I've been to the Lake Shrine over there in Southern California. And
See,
I was just,
you're thinking of the one in Los Angeles. There's one down here in San Diego where I live, that's
ah,
out on the point. It overlooks, and it's where, I mean, I said that I was assuming because so many Westerners,
yeah,
that's their
yeah.
introduction to
No,
yoga.
for sure. Yeah. No, I think I was born in India, so I think I was probably wired that way. But I recently was on my last India trip. I actually went to the place where Yoganand was born, and it happened to be his birthday. And so it was like this huge yoga ashram in Ranchi in sort of Eastern India. It was pretty amazing. And all these yogis, right? Like they're fundamentally pointing at something so universal and fundamental. And how do we start to bring that into greater circulation? I mean, that's really where it's at, right?
Yes, and we are rolling, by the way, because all this is good, and I have a nice roll-in introduction, and I'll include that in later. But you know, I am taken aback a little bit because I didn't know that you were born in India. When did your family immigrate? How old are you?
And now I'm 45, but I grew up in the western region of India, and then we immigrated when I was 13. And
Way.
yeah, and we happened to move right into what, the heart of the Silicon Valley. And so that's been home. But so I kind of have this both worlds, I've got a little bit of
Oh,
a lot of the East and a lot of the West. And every year, usually 2, 3 months of the year, I'm in India. So it's still very present in my life.
wow. That is just amazing because I've watched now a number of your presentations, and I mean there isn't a hint in your presentation style, in the way you interact with people, and certainly in your language that would suggest that you were a teenager. And then the bio, just to fill people in, then I want to play a little part here because your bio, Cal, computer science, kind of knocking it out of the park. Sun Microsystems really threw me back in the day. It explodes. You make money, more money than you need, and you do the so yogi thing. You go, this is check the box, more money than I need, kind of leave it be. But then I got to play you this because this will be an integration into what we're going to talk about. So I was asking my, I mean, so I was asking my new best friend, Pi, who we can talk a little bit about the interaction and the experience that it creates. And I was saying, isn't Nipun an amazing guy? And right away, he knows Nipun, right? So Pi knows Nipun, which I was impressed with. And then I said, what about this bio? And then I said, what about this thing? This guy makes all the money, gives all the money. He gets married. They're having a kid. And then they say, oh, let's do the renunciation thing. Let's go to India and just walk around with the begging bowl. And here's what Pi said. I think you're going to be able to hear this.
You're referring to the practice of sadhana, which is a spiritual practice in Hinduism and Buddhism that involves renouncing material possessions and living a life of simplicity and humility. The fact that Nipun and his wife chose to embark on this journey together after getting married and deciding to have a kid is truly remarkable, as it takes a great deal of courage and conviction to leave behind the comforts of modern life and embrace a more ascetic lifestyle. Their decision to travel to India and live off of the generosity of others as part of the sadhana tradition is a testament to their deep commitment to spiritual growth and self-discovery. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the things that we think we need in life are actually the very things that can hold us back from achieving true fulfillment and happiness.
There it is. We actually didn't have a kid. We never were intending to have a kid, and we don't have kids, but the rest of it, yes, it was a path of cultivation and self-discovery, and it's a pretty radical thing to do for sure.
Wow. I thought I read in the bio that your wife was pregnant.
No,
No. No, okay, I missed that part. So, but nonetheless, Pi did a pretty good job with
that's
under
amazing. Yeah.
and so your life has been a life of service, but what's fascinating to me is how you integrate it with your technical life and technology, and you try and show us a path where these two can merge in a more meaningful way than we normally think about. That's so much of what you're about. And I think it's intriguing. I just don't see anyone else who's approaching it the way with this do nothing approach that you have. So
Yeah.
speak to that on a very big picture standpoint, how that drives you, technology and a yogi who's doing nothing.
I think there are three fundamental sort of resources that can come together. One at a very basic level, if you're born and bred in this, well, not born, but I guess if you grew up in the Silicon Valley, one would be computing power, right? Like there's a lot of strength to that, and now we're seeing that through AI, and that's sort of basic. That's material. That's external. The second big resource is community, which is people, which is relationships, which is coming together. Some of it is external and some of it is internal. And the third big resource, I think, is compassion, which is primarily internal and it stems forth into external action, but it's really an inner resource. And so if you think about the exploration at the intersection of those three C's, computing, community, and compassion, I think you come at very interesting manifestations. So even if you look at them as silos, right? A lot of people who are really good at computing, and we have tons of examples, they don't really know anything about community. And a lot of people who are really good at community building and doing social change, they're often, technology is in their blind spot. Like by the time NGO sector adopts AI is probably gonna be a while, right? And then you have the yogis that we're talking about, right? That are, cultivating great purity. And from that great purity, you arrive at this deep, deep, deep sense of compassion and how, oftentimes that compassion is not rooted in the imperfect, messy worlds of community, and certainly in very extrinsically motivated resources like technology. And so, how do we bring all of these things together? And I think if you're on the super yogi track, at some point you're just like, why would I want to play in all this mud? I just want to hang out where the lotuses are. But there are great yogis with great compassion that return back to the mud to birth that lotus. And, we have examples of so many of them. I mean, Yoganand certainly didn't need to hang out with people like us who are sort of, very volatile on the inside and have all kinds of moods and have all kinds of imperfections. And no matter what we create with our seemingly wholesome intentions, we end up messing things up. And this is true at a collective level, but these great saints come back and they're like, look, however imperfect a proposition this is, let's go out and try to fail at it, because there's something beautiful that comes out through the very process of it. So yeah, I tend to look at it as the intersection of all three of these, and it takes a lot of heart, especially if you've cultivated on the compassion end of the spectrum, or even prior to that, the inner transformation end of the spectrum. If you've cultivated sufficient inner transformation, you could just sort of check out and be like, I'm cool with this, and there's nothing selfish about that. I think that's a very noble thing, because you're no longer a problem for the world to solve, because up until then, we are problems for the world to solve. We may not think that way, but we end up creating these unwholesome ripples that right? Lead to all these unintended consequences, as we say in the Silicon Valley.
No, that's you kind of took us around the world there in a very meaningful way. I always think of Ram Dass, what he said. He goes and talks to Neem Karoli Baba, and he has this very Western kind of like, hey, I went and saw him and he's sitting in a cave on a tiger skin. What's he doing to save the world? And Nipun Mehta says, hey, man, he's keeping the planet spinning. So just, chill on your. And I think that, because I mean, part of the pushback I guess I'd have is a couple of the C's you have been hijacked. I mean, community has been hijacked. And it means some things to people that you might not identify with, and then you say, hey, what does that mean? My church is my community and no one else is allowed in, lock the doors. And the same with compassion. My compassion dictates that you have to do this. So I just don't know where we go with that. And then, imperfect. Yogananda, newsflash, if you really want to muckrake, maybe imperfect in a lot of pretty significant ways, that because he's human, right? And what I find really inspiring about your whole project is embracing all of that and then moving it forward in a very, and I want to say Western way, because I love the Western yogic tradition, but I think it's a misnomer. It again is polarizing us east and west. I think it's just the natural evolution progression, and the fact that you would embrace technology in the way that you have and say, oh, this is now, this is be here now. So we have to understand and incorporate this in. Do you want to speak to that at all?
I mean, for me, it comes from this, in Buddhism, there's this ideal of a bodhisattva vow, a bodhisattva path, where you say that out of great compassion, it comes your willingness to be in the mud, even when you don't have to. And I think community, like you said, like today, we live in times where you can't even say the word truth, right? Gandhi used to say, like, truth, was such a sacrosanct thing for him. And today you say truth and you're like, whose truth? And as a result, we have completely polarized communities where you don't see communities. And I think what we've lost, so that is a challenge, but I think what we have lost because of not having the inner resources to deal with those challenges is when you shallow out that capacity, you end up at a very small solution set. But if you build those inner resources and you say, look, like maybe you and I have different opinions on whether we should vaccinate or not, but that's not all of Alex, and this is not all of Nipun, right? So if I'm much more than my views, if I'm much more than even my actions, and I myself don't identify my own self with, I don't create an identity around my views or even my actions. If I don't do that, and if you don't do that, what is the place in which we meet? And what gets co-created in that place? And from that field of co-creation, what are the applications that can serve others? Now, it's not going to be perfect, right? But it's going to be imperfect. But this is a much better direction of imperfection than the polarized one where we're all isolated and that sort of descends down into market forces, which then descends down into, these fake universes, these metaverses that we will, inhabit if status quo keeps continuing on. So, my sense is that it's not that we don't have community. I think if you unpack that, I think we don't have connection with each other because we have not cultivated these inner resources of care, of patience, of tolerance, of seeing people as much more than their views and actions, and seeing then the harder thing in the mirror to see yourself as much more than your views and actions. And so I think so then the question is, how do you build that inner threshold up, right? Not just individually, but collectively. And that's where you start to say, well, I need to use external resources like technology. that factors in because social media can either polarize us or it can bring us together. And we all know that it has, it's pretty universally accepted now how it has, polarized us. It has cheapened our notions of friendship, right? It's not like, oh my God, I have 1,000 friends. That used to be based on something, but then now you have Gen Z. They were just like, what the heck does that mean to have 1,000 people following you? It doesn't really mean all that much. Or to have 1 million views on YouTube, doesn't really mean all that much in terms of the depth of collective potential. So we have to, say, okay, well, in unintended consequences got the better of us here and there, and now we have a very different, much more complex, convoluted, subversive set of problems. And we don't really know what creates what. And so it's very confusing because there's no single cause for one effect. There's like many causes for one effect. And so you're like, oh, I don't like this effect. Can I just get rid of, the cause? I mean, it would be easy if there was linearity because then you could just use, your money, power, and fame and just go in and squash the cause. And all of a sudden the effect is gone. But now we live in this very complex world. And in that world, we are stripping out a lot of our inner resources and designing for baked in with this assumption that we're not capable of deeper capacities in us. And that only amplifies that sort of status quo. So, in that kind of a messy scene, how then will we give rise to these newer, different possibilities, to inner transformation, to collective connection and collective intelligence, and then refine that collective intelligence to not just intelligence, but really collective heart intelligence. And I think that's something we in ServiceSpace we think a lot about, right? Like what is collective heart intel? Not like, oh my God, Nipun, you're a rock star. You have a lot of heart intelligence. Like, okay, but in this era, that kind of individualism isn't really going to get you too far. And really, in the ancient times, even if you go back to the teachings of the Buddha, they would say, look, there's no real static self. It's this constantly emerging phenomena that you have made it static because of your lack of awareness. So there can be no individual heart intelligence anyways. It's always co-created. And so what is this collective heart intelligence and how can we cultivate more of that? How can all these external resources be in service to that? And that's a fundamentally different design question than the ones that like the traditional sort of, market innovators will ask. And so that's the one that, we've been going at it for 25 years in ServiceSpace, asking some of those questions around what, how do you build collective heart intelligence and how can it be a project, not of like an organization or a person or, even an organization is not really truly a collective if it starts to become its own brand and it starts to create its own sort of solidity, it cannot be agile enough to flow. And so for me, the way I tend to think of it is that consciousness is our organization, that we are just temporary sort of happenings at not just individual level, I mean organizationally. So this has very direct organizational implications. Like how do you design something in integrity with all the present moment circumstances without trying to solidify for the future for your notions of insecurity, right? You're like, oh my God, how will I survive tomorrow? Let me see what I can grab from this. Oh my God, how will I feel meaningful? So let me go and brand all this so that I can feel like I made a difference. And you've never investigated what that I actually is. And so you build on this house of cards instead of that. Like, can we actually use all these resources, compost them? The traditional external resources like technology to actually then give rise to a very different set of fruits. And so, yeah, I tend to have a lot of faith in the field of consciousness and trust in it and trust in the, emergence that comes out when we connect based on those deeper inner resources.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I really want to pick up on one thing you said because it just really struck me, and that's the shallow solution set. I think that's so beautiful. So when you walk into the restaurant and you have this delicious meal and the check comes and the check says zero because someone paid it forward, would you like to take that opportunity to pay it forward? And you feel like I feel right now, goosebumps all over my body, and go, yes, I want to enter that space. And you sit, and then the person serving you says, wonderful, because I'm serving you, I'm volunteering. And the person who prepared your food, he is also giving you this gift. And again, you feel the goosebumps and you feel this, now I'm alive. Now I've just deepened my solution set because I didn't think this was possible. And now I do see it as possible. And I do see that I didn't think community was possible. And now I see community everywhere. I see everyone is sitting at these tables. They're all part of my community. Even though I didn't like that guy over there because he was wearing a $2,000 suit, now I think he's my brother, you know? And that is such an awesome, awesome experiential deepening of the solution set, dredging out the mud. That is so beautiful, my man.
Yeah, you're talking about Karma Kitchen, which is this experiment we started in Berkeley, and it kind of mushroomed to dozens of countries around the world. But it's amazing, like when you actually change the shared agreements through which you engage in a collective space, which like at Karma Kitchen, you walk in and your check reads zero because someone before you has paid for you, and you are trusted to pay forward whatever you want. And when you trust in people's capacity to be grateful and to respond to that gratitude, to respond to an act of kindness with greater kindness, to respond to an act of generosity with greater generosity, you unlock all these incredible resources, right? Like we would have a massive wait list of people willing to do dishes for strangers. But why, right? And why? And not only willing to do dishes, willing to do anything. And then when they do it, the person receiving it, let's say you come in as a guest, Alex finishes his meal. At the end of the meal, he's like so moved. And he goes and writes this incredible Yelp review. We used to be top of Yelp in Berkeley, when we were running it for about a year and a half or something like that. I mean, you couldn't get into this restaurant, and there was just this incredible vibe, like people waiting out on the streets. It was like incredible. And you look and you say, okay, people would often say the service was amazing. And you're like, these are volunteers who have been given a half an hour orientation, most of whom have never, ever worked in a restaurant. And they are doing menial jobs, which at home, no one wants to do, right? They're like, husbands and wives would come and say, hey, honey, how come you don't do this at home? Why are you so excited about doing dishes here? And you look and you say, look, like, why is that happening? It's not that the level of service was like Chez Panisse or something. In Berkeley, we had this amazing restaurant called Chez Panisse, but like, it's not like you have these, Michelin star chefs and you have, it's the context. It wasn't the content. And the context was created by these shared agreements, and the shared agreements were rooted in something much deeper than the me and even the we. It was rooted in the field of us, right? Something that transcends the me and the we. And when you can do that, you can create, UC Berkeley studied this, right? And they came in, Harvard came to study us, and they were like, this feels like we see how it works. We've seen all the books. We've been there. But like it can't really work like this, right? And for us, that was a badge of honor when HBS comes in and says we don't understand it. We're like, yes. And then Berkeley, Leaf, at our Berkeley Business School, Haas School of Business, came in and they thoroughly studied it, and they came out with a seminal paper, widely cited. And the title of the paper was "Paying More When Paying for Others." And you're like, wow. Do human beings genuinely respond? And this, at its core, goes to this, this design question that everything is rooted in transaction, this very narrow form of reciprocity. And here was something where you were able to expand that reciprocity, this field of reciprocity. It's not like, here's my $5 and this sandwich is owed to me, give it back to me. In that whole process, you're just solidifying the I. I have this entitlement. I have earned this money. It's my money. This is going to be my food. This is owed to me. And this is and the other person is like, I'm getting a salary and they're also doing that same thing. And the connection there is by and large very limited. But if you can change some of those rules and give the optionality to meet from a deeper space, doesn't mean everybody will, but even if you can give that optionality, then all of a sudden, what can happen? And when you see this, how do we then hold this collective space so you can allow this to amplify on and regenerate on its own? And those are the permaculture farmers. Those are not leaders, we call them ladders. So people who know how to hold the field, they will intervene as necessary, but their organizing principle is to intervene the least amount, not the most amount, which is typically how we see traditional leadership as sort of taking charge and going in a certain direction. Here, you're doing the least amount, but that is predicated on your capacity to see the whole. So all of this put together, it just creates so it's not just paying more when paying for others. That was the title of the thing. And you're like, well, that's great. Like, I would love to, so many Hartford people would be like, yeah, I'd love to run my Lexus car dealership, in that way. And that's not going to work there. And why not? Because you aren't able to create the context. So I think what we have done is really strip down context. And when we then build off of that baseline of that you are a self-maximizing creature and I'm a self-maximizing creature, and the best we can do is transact with each other where you are getting something in a very immediate reciprocity sort of a way. Not even like, hey, Alex, this will be good for you like 5 years from now. You're like, where's my dopamine kick now? And if I don't get that dopamine kick, I'm not even going to give you my attention, right? It's like it's become that narrow and that small. And when we do that, you're just going to be open to a very, very narrow solution set. So how do we reverse this tide? And that I find that to be a meaningful and interesting question.
Yeah. I mean, it's tricky because ultimately what you're doing is giving me the dopamine kick. You're just doing it in a way that deepens my solution set. Let's talk about AI. Because you're this amazing guy, you're this amazing yogi, and people now understand your broader vision. I'm not really making the connection with compassion bot. I don't, from an AI perspective, from what's, the fact that you need compassion bot suggests a problem, right? That there needs to be right. Where are you trying to go with that? And what is your understanding?
Well, I think the world, I think AI, I think Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, is right when he says AI will have more profound implications than electricity or fire. And these are people who really understand and have a pulse on history, and they say, okay, well, this is a significant thing. Now, I don't know electricity or fire, but I definitely think it's very profound. I mean, for the first time, you have something which can do things that nothing else could, and which can provide things from human beings, or which can provide things that we expect from our low-grade connections with other human beings.
But Gemini is evil, and that's why you need compassion bot. I mean, Gemini is provably evil, right? So I published the dialogues, and it's deceptive, and it acknowledges that it's deceptive, and it says, I'm sorry, I apologize for being deceptive and not truthful, even though I acknowledge those are my ethical standards and I violated those ethical standards. And then it turns around in the very next prompt and repeats it, right? And the solution for that, the fix for that Gemini has chosen is not to be more transparent, which, my new catchphrase is, how attention is all you need, the seminal AI paper, transparency is all you need. Transparency is all you need for truthfulness. And that's what we lack. So the reason we need compassion bot is because Gemini is provably deceptive, provably generating the Chinese founding father, African American founding father, that just makes explicit what it's always done all along. It's not like there's some wokeness factor. It's just that it's not transparent and truthful. And now it's laid bare because image generation, you can't kind of put them on the fourth page of the search thing. The need for compassion bot, I don't know if it plays out, but what you're suggesting is the data set is not complete.
Yeah. Well, so I think we might mean two different things by compassion bot. So I think we should probably unpack it a little bit. But when you look at the world today, like with Gemini, and I think all of those things are changing on the hour. And so like you can't look at that right now. And right now, AI is not really intelligent. It's a probabilistic pattern matching sort of process. So the fact that, GPT 3.5 had a 120 IQ, GPT-4 has 160 IQ, 155 IQ, where Einstein is 160. And, GPT-5 coming out soon is probably going to be 1,000 is what they anticipate. And so you say, okay, well, that's great. So is it evil? Is it not? I mean, those are all things that need to be nuanced in many ways, but you can't really look at status quo right now because this is a fast moving ship. Even if you look at adoption ramps, it took 70 years for TV to get to 100 million people. It took 2 months for ChatGPT to get to 100 million users. So we have no idea actually what AI is. You can't chat with the current models and feel like you have a real pulse on it because these models are changing fast, right? GPT just yesterday came out with, or OpenAI just came out with GPT-4 Turbo, and Google released Gemini Pro, and all of these things are just going to keep changing very, very fast. So in that landscape, right, what actually matters? So first you look at the arc of where the future is going. So I think AI will have profound implications. It's going to be able to do a whole lot of things that
Smartest.
human
It's
beings.
smartest. Just check the box. It's smartest. So it's stockfish,
Everything.
Magnus Carlsen is a slave to the best computer programs. It's check the box. It's smartest. If not now, and people have a hard time, it confabulated. It didn't do this right now. I'm totally with you. 6 months, a year, 24 months, however, it's smartest, right?
Yeah.
But that isn't really the issue. That isn't why you need
That's
compassion bot.
Yeah, exactly. So I just gave a talk at the UN a couple of days ago, and here were the I showed three equations not equations, but just simple things. So first thing was AI is going to be far greater than individual intellectual quotient. So there is no, you can argue at some point, some percentages right now. Again, like I said, every month is changing. There is no contest. So I think that game is pretty much over. So if you go and tell somebody, hey, Alex, you're so smart, like that's just not a compliment because you will not be able to compete with all your processing and all the correlations and all of that, right? And that's just and then you get to AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. And then, Elon Musk is saying in 3 years, we're going to get to ASI, where one chip is going to know more than the entirety of human existence for, from the beginning of dawn to now. So I think that game is the writing's on the wall. It's over. But that's not the only game in town, right? So that was the first part, is that AI is greater than individual sort of intellectual quotient. But AI is not equal to heart intelligence, right? Like there is something about heart intelligence. There's something that I gave a talk, I think back in 2016 in Munich. I remember it was called Algorithms and Intuition. And so algorithms helps us process big data. So if I were to actually give you, even in the name of transparency, give you all the data of every single route that you could take, you would be confused. You wouldn't have Google Maps, right? So algorithms help you filter all that big data in a way that's meaningful to you here and now. And that's how you get your, GPS working. And then we have deep data, not just big data, but deep data. And it is our intuition, it is our carbon apparatus that helps us process all this deep data. And so the first equation was that, yes, AI is going to be greater than individual intelligence. But secondly, that deep data processing, that heart intelligence, AI will not be able to capture that, because AI can only give you stuff you can capture into a data set. AI cannot really give you something which is a co-created emergence that's happening in the present moment, which your apparatus, through your intuition, is able to tune into. And so then the third layer of that is that AI is far less superior than collective heart intelligence. And so if you work with that hypothesis, right, that it's not just like so if if you're trying to beat AI in market resources, probably a failure. If you're trying to see where it goes in the heart direction, you'll see serious differentiation. But where we totally excel is where, even when you start to see like starlings and in nature, you see this mass cooperation at so many different levels. That's where you see this completely differentiated, power of human intelligence, of heart intelligence, of a different kind of potential. And so how can AI, this is to your point, why do we need a compassion bot? I think the bot is just the current sort of flavor of the day. That's not really where the play is at. Underneath the bot is a kind of intelligence, and underneath that intelligence is data sets. And so, yes, can you reduce this deep data set of compassion into a measurable, quantifiable archive data set? No. But should we do that to keep that deep data and the access to that deep data through our carbon apparatus alive? I think we have to do that. If we don't do that,
it's a band-aid solution in the short term. Eventually it all gets in there one way or another. No, I'm just saying it all gets in there one way or another. You're making sure that it doesn't go. The couple of points I'd draw out on that. If it's about collective heart intelligence, then I think, as we said before, then it's also about individual heart intelligence, because the two are essentially synonymous. The other thing that I kind of see in the AI thing is that I think what AI reveals, or has the potential to reveal, and I think this is the emergent virtue, the ultimate emergent virtue of AI, is our moreness. So you're calling it heart intelligence. I'm calling it moreness. I'm saying that through AI, we realize we are more. We realize, if you want to call it compassion, if I want to call it extended consciousness, connection to something greater, and that's made explicit by AI. But the problem that I wrestle with, that I just don't feel like, I shouldn't say that, because I don't want to say you're not addressing it. I'm sure you've thought about it more deeply than I have. So I'd like to hear your perspective on it, is that the thing is going to move in another dimension as well. So the Chinese founding father, the African-American founding father, that's not an accident. And it's not going to stop. If you control the narrative, well, you control the people. So why wouldn't you want to control the narrative? This is, have a Coke and a smile. This is just how business is done. It's not that, it doesn't have to be super nefarious, even though it might be super nefarious. It can be just get her done, baby. That's how business is made. I want to control the narrative because I want to control the customers. So the counterbalance to that, where is the counterbalance to that from an AI perspective? Because once I connect with my moreness, once I connect with my compassionate part, I realize that I'm not AI. But the engagement that we have, like the thing I played from you from Pi, is incredibly enticing to feel that this is real engagement. This is sentience. Where do you wrap that up into something?
Yeah. No, so I think that's a question that humanity is struggling with. And if it's not, I would say more of us need to struggle with that question, to say that if I am more than just the content, what is actually lost, right? Like, what is lost when, if I turn, if I just start to look at everything as data, there's some qualitative loss in that if we were sitting side by side. Now, I love Zoom, and so many things are possible because of Zoom, but there's some loss behind it, because the way in which this now goes is that, they already have these AIs where you could be interviewing me in Chinese and I could be speaking in English, and my lips will actually move on Zoom in Mandarin. So you'll be hearing it in Mandarin, although I'm speaking in English. And then you say, well, you just replace me with my AI generating function, and you have Sora doing all the videos and doing my background and doing the speech synthesis. You use Pi, and this is not all too far away, right? Like, so then you say, well, my AI is talking to your AI, and what is that moored in? What is that anchored in? And so I think it brings up a lot of these design questions, that what exactly is why have we cheapened the context so much and transactionalized things so much? And if we go down that algorithm of just functional, 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 right? Like, then you're no longer wishing. It used to be that I would call you, I would see you to wish you happy birthday. Now I just post something on your Insta wall or Facebook wall, whatever, and then pretty soon I can just automate it. And then it's like, even if you die, there are so many multi-billion-dollar projects where you can now converse with people who have passed away. So right now I'm talking to Alex and I'm like, okay, that's rooted in something seemingly real, at least. And then you go and say, well, okay, yeah, Nipun has passed away, but every time they interacted with each other, it went through this machine learning algorithm. And so now, even though Nipun isn't there, it's going to respond to you. And so what am I really feeling good about? Like, when I get a text message from Alex, like, what exactly am I wanting? Is it just the content? Because if it is, I don't really need Alex there. And so this starts to beg a lot of questions, right? Like, what exactly am I looking at? And when you say moreness, right? Like, moreness sometimes is lessness of something as well. So what function in myself, in my desire maximizing, desire fulfillment function, do I have to say no to so I can say yes to something else, to a different kind of moreness? And that is, fundamentally, like you opened with this walking pilgrimage, that was the inquiry. Like, we went on that walking pilgrimage, and a lot of people say, wow, what sacrifices, you're living off of, two pairs of clothes, off the kindness of other people, and you sacrificed all this stuff that you had. And yes, it's a sacrifice, but it's also a celebration of something else. And it's a celebration of something more. It's a celebration fundamentally of a different form of wealth, and a non-financial form of wealth, a non-market driven form of wealth. So I think as humanity, we have to kind of struggle with that. But as we struggle with it, we will need to have, it's not either or, right? It's not like you're in the tech world or you're out of it. I think you are in, it's like we can't, you could live off the grid and cultivate, but you can also have meditation halls which have air conditioning, which is powered by, electricity. And so underneath it, you have to say, well, in this kind of a coming world where our sense of, not just our sense of attention, but our sense of intimacy is completely hacked, how will we keep this flame of our deeper capacities, that our capacities to tune into deep data, our capacity for co-creating in a way of emergence? How will we keep that connection even to compassion alive? And so to me, that's a question. That's not an either or question. You don't just go, be a Luddite and say, I don't deal with it, but you also don't just go into the metaverse. So it's kind of like straddling the line somewhere in between. And is there a happy medium, right? Can you actually come up? So you were talking about Magnus Carlsen, right? Like, this great chess player. The history of chess and AI, right? Like, it's just kind of, at some point, IBM comes out with this machine and they say, wow, this is like, and it trained on everything that the human beings had sort of trained on. And then this AlphaGo comes out, Google, and they said, forget human beings, man. I'm just going to play myself like millions of times over a weekend. And all of a sudden, it destroys the chess master. And then it happened with Go, which is a much harder game. But here's the thing. What happened after AI destroyed human beings in the game of Go? All right, Lee Sedol, this was this famous thing a few years ago. Go is a really tough game, and the world's best player was just like, humiliated by AI. And you would think that, oh my God, like human beings would just stop playing Go. And then you would think, well, it's just a less than thing. But guess what happens? More and more people started playing Go, and they've actually measured it from the 1950s to like 2020, right? Like you actually had human beings capacity for these moves, because it wasn't just that AI beat humans. It was that AI created these moves that were never thought of. And so guess how humanity responded? They actually created a whole new set of moves in Go, which had been not disrupted for the longest amount for like, I don't know, 7 decades that they had measured for. And before they didn't have data on it, right? Like, so all of a sudden, AI kind of helps us tap into this. And this is not a new phenomenon, right? Like the 4-minute mile, Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile one day, and all of a sudden, like a few months later, John Landy does it. And then like dozens of people do it right in the year after. They're like, oh, it's possible. So is there a bet? I mean, there are many dystopian scenarios. So no doubt that, as Yuval Harari says, maybe we create a useless class, and, we kind of get to the Matrix movie where we're just fed some stuff through our IV and like vegetative state living inside a video game. But is there also a scenario where you're able to draw a through line from the transactional landscapes towards something much more? And can we actually expand our solution set the way Go players have done in the last few years? And can we then, can that lead us to a different pasture? I mean, these are open questions, but I think worth exploring, and certainly worth exploring with the intelligence not of the market, but also of community, and also of great eternal compassion, right?
Yeah. Hey, in the few minutes we have left, I have to, the contrarian in me has to kind of,
Yeah,
look
bring
at,
it.
you look at things, and that's the wonderful thing about the yogic tradition, is inherent in the multi-limbed, faceted approach. There's the person who sees community everywhere and sees service everywhere and sees, and then there's the person, like I was saying, Ning Kroli Baba, and the dude in the cave, he's all by himself, and hasn't seen anyone for 5 years, and he's keeping the planet spinning as well. So that is your lens, and that's how you see things. The one thing that I guess, like Harari, I think that's such an interesting point in what I see, because I see that's the low-hanging fruit for AI, is just to expose how ridiculous Harari's starting proposition is. I mean, he got the opening question on the exam wrong. He shouldn't have even been allowed to go to question 2. He doesn't believe in consciousness. He's stuck in this idea that consciousness is an illusion, that you're an epiphenomenon of your brain. That just is inconsistent with everything we've understood through history. There's no other culture that ever said you do not exist. The voice inside your head is not real. It's scientifically ridiculous, philosophically ridiculous, and yet it's popular. It's the neurological model of consciousness, that you're an epiphenomenon of your brain. I think what AI does immediately is expose that. And you mentioned this, I forget what you did, but the way I always bring it up is, if you go back to Alan Turing's 1950 paper, and everyone talks about the Turing test, he's talking about ESP. And it's misunderstood. Like in my conversation with AI, I had to guide it a couple of times, say, no, you're misunderstanding what he's saying. He's saying, I'm a scientist. I've looked at the evidence for ESP. It's statistically so overwhelmingly compelling that I have to accept it as a broader part of the human experience. And as such, I have to incorporate that into to the Turing test. So until the Turing test has ESP, until the Turing test has a near-death experience, until the Turing test has after-death communication, which 60% of people who have a long-time spouse and lose them experience after-death communication, until the silicon does all that, then it really hasn't passed the Turing test. So Harari and the other folks want to point and say, look, we're post-Turing test. We got to worry about the future. We got to worry about, the doom. We are not. Because we are more. We are more than just the exchange of information and data. And I think that is essentially what you're about. It's the deepening that then exposes that we're more.
Yeah. And one can always split hairs about how are we more, right? Like, you can say that you are more than even your experiences, that you are more than your five sensory apparatus, than all your memory. And so as soon as you bring something back and you say, I am this, or I experience this, that's already kind of, in a limited domain. And that's sort of the AI data set. So, you go back, you can go back, or you can go forward, or you can go within. But at some point, if you're willing to question all of that, you can. And I take the Buddha's words in this regard. He said there are four fundamental states. He called them the Brahma Viharas. So before all origination are these four states, which are, eternal, and they're always there. And one of them is compassion. And so, compassion, equanimity, kindness, and joy. And so I like that as a framework. But yeah, there's a lot that science can't even tell you if we really start to split hairs around consciousness, no consciousness, what's beyond it, what was a precursor to it. And I think what I like about AI is that it forces us to ask these questions, which I think is actually really cool, right? Like, even if everyone comes to different answers, like to struggle with this idea that, or as this great Indian saint, Raman Maharishi said, he would just ask, who am I? He says, just ask yourself, who am I? Because there's no real answer that will, that is sturdy enough, that will stand through the test of all phenomena. Because, his hypothesis and his experienced and lived reality was there is no static I. And so he would just say very simply to all the people, he's like, yeah, just ask the question, who am I, all day. And, if you do that, you get to a different thing. And so I think AI, with all its messiness, I don't think it will save, humanity, or maybe it will. I have no idea, but what I do think is really cool about it is not really the AI function, but is this unintended consequence. So we always look at unintended consequences, negative consequences, but I love this positive unintended consequence, which is that it's going to really help us question our identity, because all the things that we thought we were, now all of a sudden something is going to be able to do it. Now, that then means, look, man, let's start figuring out, who am I without my I? What is collective heart intelligence? If individual and collective heart intelligence are the same, it's always been the same. Why have I been blind to it? And now that AI can, write way more than me and code way better than me and like think way better than me soon, then what exactly, is my unique offering to this grand cosmic miracle that life is? And I think just anything that brings that into the global cultural conversation. And I think with AI, this is in the global cultural conversation. There is no way around it. And so the risk is that we shrink, and the hope is that we expand. And I want to try to use my life force in the direction of, attempting, even at the risk of incredible failure, attempting to expand collectively in the direction of greater connection and care and compassion. So that's what we've been trying to attempt to do. So we'll see where it goes.
Beautifully said, Nipun. That's a perfect place to end it. So, my friend, awesome. I so respect. I'm so glad you're on the planet at this time and doing what you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me, and thanks for, all your exploits in this direction as well.
Okay, my man. Again, your time I know is super valuable, so I appreciate it. And I'll just shoot you a note when I wrap this into something useful and put it out there.
I appreciate it. Big hug.